This is the GGJ Podcast, a show about the games industry, the people who make them, and the communities that grow up around them. I'm Susan Gold, a game education trailblazer and one of the founders of the Global Game Jam. Each week, we will be sitting down with a new guest, highlighting their own path and journey. This is a space for honest conversation from makers about creativity, collaboration, failure, and the messy, the beautiful reality of making games. So whether you're a young dev or seasoned, an educator, a student, or someone who just loves games and the people behind them, welcome to the GGJ Podcast. Take a breath, settle in, and let's hear directly from the makers themselves.
This episode is made possible in partnership with the Global Game Jam, the world's largest game creation event, bringing together creators from around the globe. A big thank you as well to the Global Game Jam's headline sponsors, Epic Games, Games for Change, and Xsola, for helping make this creative community a reality. To learn more and to get involved in the upcoming jams, visit globalgamejam.org.
All right, so I'm going to introduce to you, everyone, someone who's made a real difference in my personal life, be it in understanding design, understanding culture at a large studio, someone who really educated me on what's really happening when it comes to really huge franchises, and who is real, who loved to do game jams and design conversations and philosophy conversations. And I was so drawn to him. He was in a small town in the south of France, and we were both at the same conference, and we just started talking. And I think I've loved you ever since. This is my friend and our guest today, Alexis Jolis Desautels.
Oh, wow. I love that. If only my mom could hear what happened to my French name. Also, I go by AGD, which makes me sound like, I don't know, cooler, I guess, or not. Maybe it shows my age. But that's what I do with most English speakers. So it's a thing.
Thank you for letting me butcher your name. All right. So I just introduced you from my point of view. How would, your wife, or how would she introduce you to the rest of the world?
I will not answer that question, but I could say, who knows?
Okay, how would your best friend answer?
Okay, that's better. I can try that. So I'm a 44-year-old game developer, born and raised in Montreal. I've been in games for 20 years now. So I started, I guess, somewhat young at the time. I come from a half French, half Quebecois. Born from a French mom who immigrated. She flew France at the time. She wanted to live something different. And both of my parents worked in radio and television all their lives. And so I come from that kind of background. So communication and the love of talking to people, I guess. And then I worked as an actor when I was a young adult. And it was amazing. And it's been very useful to me since. But my wife got pregnant at the time. And I felt like I couldn't handle the pressure of soon to be a father and also working as an actor. And I was like, I love it, but it's too crazy. What am I going to do? I started so young. I can't do anything else, et cetera, et cetera. And my wife actually told me you should try to work in games because you have an understanding. But I was like, what am I going to do? I've been an actor for the past 5 years. My resume says I can rollerblade and play saxophone. That's an actor resume. If I remove all the actor crap, then it says nothing. I never finished a diploma. I studied 4 different things: Japanese history, medieval Japanese history. I studied literature and writing. I went to theater. And I never finished anything, which, by the way, is kids, don't do it. Please don't do what I did, because especially nowadays, it's so much harder to get anywhere. And I tell designers specifically, we'll talk about design, but I tell them finish anything at all, doesn't matter. If you do a degree in marine biology, do that, and it'll still get you in a better place than if you never finish anything, which I did. But yeah, I got into design. I was lucky enough to be born in Montreal, meaning by that it was already a video game hub 20 years ago. There was so many companies, a lot of opportunities, I think. And I got into Ubisoft as a tester, like in the sort of yield backdoor, which again, I don't recommend so much these days because it doesn't really happen that way. A lot of test is offshored, I want to say, into cheaper countries to run for companies. But at the time, it wasn't the case. There was a big testing floor with 300 testers And that's how I got in. And then I worked my way up, talked to people, got a gig, got a chance to try a bit of design on a project, did that, got the job. And then I started as a game designer, working on the top of the pile and just learning stuff and using a bit of all that background from around to try to feed the design machine.
Was there anybody that helped feed that fuel? Were there people that were like your muses or inspired you or mentored you?
Yeah. Yeah, there were. Otherwise, I think none of that would have happened, to be honest. The first step was the user research lab was just founded, and it's a pretty big, nowadays, it seems obvious for people to run that. But at the time, it was really new. And then the Montreal Ubisoft studio was building this big lab. I got a job there to organize the internal tests, talking to the devs. What do you need? Creating the forms and then observing the tests, taking notes. And I learned a lot about that. And it was so someone helped me get there. And then from that, someone helped me also get in design. The lead game designer on a project said, I got an opening. I got a junior left. I'm going to see people from, internal resumes and stuff. I'm allowed to see you if you want to, but this is what you need to do.
Can you talk about who that was?
Yes, it was a man called Sebastien Yel. He was an educator at heart, which I think is probably the most important part of it. He was a smart guy, but he left games. I think he was more interested about the education part. And so he pulled me into saying, it feels like this is something you would want to do. You talked a lot about this to me. This is what you need to bring to the table. I'm not alone. And I'm not the only person in the interview. So you got to convince everyone there. And that's how I got basically my first game dev job, like really imposter syndrome on crack, because I was like, what am I doing here? But to be fair, at the time in design, there were no formal training. There was almost no studies. 20 years ago, it was really marginal. And designers were treated as such as well, as a bit of a bunch of clowns, to be honest. But so I was a clown. I became a clown that way.
You've always been funny. I mean, that's first and foremost been one of your most attractive traits. You're smart, you're funny, but you had the ability to engage with people. So, did you find when you were working at Ubi in those early years, were you helping define a lot of ideas on how to work in teams? Because the team sizes got huge there. And why don't you go through like just a quick, I had this job
Yeah.
and then this job and this job, just and then what job did you have before you left?
Yeah. So when I got my first job as a clown, I was a game designer, junior game designer on one of the Splinter Cells games. And I spent the majority of the time designing one system, which was the sidekick. It was a co-op game, but it had a sidekick thing in single player where someone would follow you around and you could do stuff. And those were like the good old days of, because I hope they never come back, of writing like a 200-pager GDD document, hoping it will be used and people will read it. And actually, yes, no, they wouldn't. But that's what I did. So for a while, I was sitting there and trying to figure out what's the best sort of experience, and very little interaction with the people I should have been interacting with. The teams were already big, probably already too big. And then I did a bunch of games as a game designer. Hopefully, I did smaller games, and I did much bigger games as well, like some of those Assassin's Creeds and Far Cry's. They were getting pretty mental at the
What
time
was your
already.
job when you were on Assassin?
Yeah, there was a few things. By the time I touched Assassins, I was already gone through, and I know this is something we probably will talk a bit more about later, but I had already gone through the whole rational design era or episode. And so it was interesting because one of the first things I did was interact with people working on the brand, looking for ways to solve some design issues. Because, and anyone will tell you, and all the haters will gladly write pages about it, Assassins is one of those brands that traditionally wouldn't take a breath. They would just chain and chain productions, one game after the other. It was a game every year, but the games used to take 3 years to make. So it means you had like multiple teams, no one ever stopping, never wondering like, why are we doing this? Should we be doing this? It's like the, what is it in track and field, like relay, the relay thing. You're already running, and then you put your hand, and then someone gives you something, and you keep on running, and you never question, why did I pick up this thing? And do I need it? And those games were made that way. I recall very distinctly having a conversation with a lead game designer saying, hey, we're doing this new thing now, this modern world narrative, and we want to integrate, like these web pages, widgets in the menu. It was the whole era of interconnectivity in games, and so I was like, let's talk about the menu. Let's get some services, some live tiles in there. And this was at the start of their conception. And he told me, oh, yeah, no, we're not going to do that because we're going to do the exact same menu from the last game. And so the development file is locked. We've not elected to work on that. We're going to work on something else. And so there's 0 hours are going to go into these menus. So we're not going to do this. And I was like, but you started 2 weeks ago. Like you're at the start of 3 years of development and you're telling me the conception phase is logged down for this thing. And it was like that for a lot of things, right? So that's they used to call it legacy. There was a polite word. Oh, no, yeah, we can't change that. That's legacy. Anyway, it's running, changing the wheels while you're driving and then hoping things get better. So that was hard, I think, on those games.
So, we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of your life, but were you ever finding yourself feeling too overwhelmed? Like you said, you're running, running, running. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but were you ever experiencing any kind of burnout or any kind of psychological effects of this kind of schedule and rigor?
Yes. Yes, the short answer. So there's a few things. I end up saying working a lot is relative. People have different thresholds. Okay. Working a lot because you're about to create something great and you just need to push is hard, but I think it's great when that happens, if you feel like that's happening. Working a lot because of mistakes is all right. It's okay. Working a lot because there was some shitty decisions made on the planet, that gets really bad. And so I think there's a lot of different reasons why you end up doing that. And the reason matters a lot. Because if you feel like you're crunching for the right reasons, then you got to take care of yourself. But yeah, do it if you think you can. Push as much as you can. I used to do it more than I do now. Obviously, I was younger. I was like, yeah, boom, boom, boom. But I ended up in a few cases where I was like, this is crazy. We're doing all this stuff because of a few shitty decisions or, bad planning or planning in disregard of like flags that you would have raised a bunch of times that were ignored. And then you end up in the trench. And then, yes, then you get damaged because you're like, I can't believe I'm losing sleep over this. I've told you 6 times. I got all the emails here. Like, why are we in this situation today? And you will have this, I think, this will never disappear. Whenever you're working on a project, for any project-based work, you're exposed to that happening. But I think the industry got so much better at large at managing that, so much better. I've been in meetings where I would see people planning the overtime. That was the thing. It's like, oh, yeah, we're not going to get through. This is a bit like too much. Okay, so let's start crunching here, and then let's crunch all the way to here, and then months in advance. And then you guys, like, you can't be serious right now. We already know this is not going to fit. So you're telling me we know when we're going to crunch and we just plan for that and we don't tell people. We just go ahead and, welcome to the trench. And I got myself in trouble in a lot of different cases. And I was probably a bit of an ass to a lot of people also in those times because yes, I would push back or I would get angry at like, if I felt there were a lot of wrong reasons for these things to happen, then I would get mad and I would lash out, not always in the best way because you're overworked and you're overstressed. So you're not going to be the best version of yourself either, right? So
So,
it was
what
some of
did
that.
you do? What at that time? What were your outlets? How did you keep yourself whole? What did you do to maintain your sanity, your family?
Yeah. Well, I had my wife. That was the first thing. Still is. Wouldn't have done any of this without her. So I got lucky there that she picked me up. I wasn't that great, I think, to get picked up at that time, but I guess she had vision. Then my kids and my kids, that was a great thing. I mean, I've been really good for the longest time to leave work at work. Basically, that's however you do it, really. But that's the thing because you can get a lot of crap. But then if you're able to leave that behind and just go back home or to your friends or your family, whatever it is you do, then you're gonna be good for a long time. At some point, I will say though, it'll catch up. It'll catch up because you can run really fast, but eventually it'll catch up because you're gonna slow down. At some point, it did catch up to me, and I did eventually hit a wall like really fast because I was used to going fast at that time. And a lot of that shit caught up to me and then I had to pay the bills. So
We'll talk about that a little bit more but I wanted to talk about because when you went from Ubisoft, you went to another job and you kept moving.
yes.
So at any point did you stop to take care of yourself other than take the wife on a beautiful vacation here and there?
No, and I think it was a I guess for me, one of the solutions, which is not bad, I'll be honest, it's not a bad solution, was to keep moving to be in a better position to solve these things. But that also comes with its own weight, and because it means you're trying to just go up and up and up and up and up. And because yes, I did end up in cases where some of that frustration I could get rid of because I was in a position where I could solve some of these things.
So let's go to one of those answers that you came up with, RLD. So I don't want this to be an RLD workshop. We'll point to a really good video on that.
Yeah.
But why don't you put RLD into your own words? And then why did you become the poster child?
So yes, don't worry, I'll do this quickly, briefly. Let's get the gist of it. So RLD, we just mentioned rational level design is actually the first thing that we saw from rational design. It was invented by the guys at Naughty Dog back when they did a talk on it, and it was just a way they would work. They would parse down the work moment to moment in linear games and try to control everything. That was the way they worked. At the time, some people in UB figured, okay, we're really good at the top-down stuff, so defining the experience, getting the pizzazz, the rear, but we're not so much in control of the moment to moment of the mechanical aspect of games. Basically, the Hollywood aspect was great. The Nintendo aspect, not as great. That's the way we explained it. So there was a push, an internal push at UB to say, let's try to construct a framework, a design framework by which we will increase control and quality of the small stuff, the nuclear design stuff. And so it was inspired by the RLD and it became a whole set of things, the RLD being part of it. And so it ended up being summed up as just rational design or rational game design, which includes everything from how do people learn, how they retain information, how do the tons work, what's hard, what are the skills that you ask of a player, how can you name them, can you deconstruct moments of gameplay, etc. So there was a whole framework centered around those ideas. And I was part of that initial development and training. There was you got to give that to UB. You got to give it to the French. They rented a castle outside of Paris for a year and a half. I was there for 6 months. I was living in a little house not far from the castle, and they would fly 20 developers every 2 weeks from all around the world to be basically prisoners of the castle grounds for 2 weeks and to go through a formal training and a bunch of workshops, like this crazy 9 days of program to go through all the different facets of rational design. And when I came back, I kept on doing it and I kept on working on it. It was a big answer for me, I think, to some of the questions of it's crazy that we don't have a better control over the craft because there has to be something more than it feels good or, oh yeah, this is cool. Like, oh, we did this because it's cool is like the worst thing I can hear from a designer, I think, still today. So that's why I got so motivated by that idea that so many people in other fields have asked those questions and they actually came up with really brilliant answers. A lot of those we can use as is, or with very little adaptation, we can turn to games and use it because games are Captain Obvious, putting it in my cap, but games exist because there's a gamer. So there's someone interacting with your system, and that person is usually a human being. So if you understand everything about the human being, you can create the better experiences. It's really not more complicated than that, but it's very hard to do, obviously.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing for me, and it still is. Yeah.
And so did some of this come from your earlier work? How did we get from here to now this being like you're still doing talks about RLD?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was, well, like I said, I guess it felt to me like it was the rational part of me that wanted it. And then I didn't know until I stumbled onto the initiative and I went like, guys, this is brilliant. Yes,
It
we should
shaped
be.
the culture
Yeah.
of design. So
Yeah. That
that's
too. That too.
really influential because then you can see it later in people's
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. That's true. And I guess aside from the technicalities of the whole thing, for sure, the most important part is the mindset. And again, this is fighting the intuitive, cool factor mindset of design, like old school design, if I want to call it that. It was fighting that, saying, embrace failure, abandon ego, or look for solutions. Don't look for ideas. It was like a lot of these little statements that some of them we've been hearing a lot now, and great. People like integrate them more naturally. I've seen like from students nowadays, I'm always so impressed by how I think there's a general evolution of the mindset that I see in a lot of them. And that's a very reassuring thing to me because whether or not they were directly exposed to that, they were exposed to the zeitgeist of these ideas that were not natural, they were not intuitive when I started design at all. I remember being in playtest and the level designer looking at behind a mirror, looking at a guy playing his map, and the guy is lost, and the level designer being like, "Oh man, why do you guys always give me like this guy's a complete like he can't play my game. Where do you find these guys?" And I was like, "Dude, it's your fault. You designed a level. If the guy is lost, it's your fault. So you should observe him and figure out how you're gonna prevent this from happening. So it's all those. Yes, it is a mindset first, and then methods and tables and documents, and for sure,
Well, one of the other things that you and I have in common about design is this love of game jams. And that is like some of the things that you have done in game jams have blown my mind. I don't know how to explain it. I'll let you explain it, but you're at a level of complexity that I think you need to explain.
for sure. Actually, the year after we met with the same people there in Montpellier, just so happened that there was a will and an interest to riff off some of those rational stuff that I was exposing then. And I got asked, oh, maybe we could create something. We have a lot of schools, there's a lot of interest. And with a good friend of mine who was actually part of the different students program here at Ubisoft, we built a thing called the Gacha. It's a game challenge. And it was the idea that we would do a student focused game jam, but that would try to instill, I think, a lot of notions that I felt would go beyond just the fun and, the idea of jamming. And so the Gacha was centered around a few simple ideas. The quality of creation comes from constraint, which is a simple principle. And there's a French author who said it well before me. And it's counterintuitive. People think that the more constraint you add, the less creative they'll be. But of course, it's the opposite. So that was the first idea. Second idea was like these were students well advanced in their programs that were about to hit the market and go and work in studios. So the Gacha was about giving them an experience that would reenact the hardships of working on a real game inside a studio with a real team, which none of the jams usually do. And that's fine. That's not the general purpose of jams. But we were saying, no, this is going to be the purpose of the Gacha. And so what we did is we created a bunch of constraints. We gamified basically the jam. And actually, I'll just show you quickly because I have them behind me, always at the ready. These are cards that were created for that system, right? Cards of the Destiny. And simply put, we would have like around 100 something students. We would separate them by trade, designers, programmers, artists, and the other guys. So basically audio and whatever else we had. And we would force random teams on them, which again, you usually don't do in a jam. And we would force large teams. And by large, I mean 10 to 13 people. Randomly, they would assemble, come in front of the table, and they would be forced to draw 5 cards of the Destiny. And these were categorized by either a gameplay challenge, a technical challenge, or an experience challenge. Easy, medium, hard. So if you're greedy and you pick a lot of hard things because they're worth more points, we did this thing where if you fail the card, you lose the points. And this is basically teaching people be focused on your decisions, which is something you need to do in games. If you try to do everything, you will fail. And you are going to work with a large team. You don't know most of these people. You will have to organize yourself. You would have to leave your ego out the door. You got 72 hours. You're not going to sleep much. Things are going to get hairy really fast. But if you do manage to work out those kinks, you will have a game so much beyond anything you could expect from a jam because there's 12 of you for 3 days. with everyone from all the fields you need. And we ended up with some games being really, really amazing, surprising state. And so we ran actually, just I looked the other day, we did 9 editions of this. Actually, we because of COVID and all that, we stopped right before the 10th. But it is what it is.
Well, I took that same kind of card to Destiny and I brought that into the classroom. So it was a way to level up their skills.
Yes.
And like I said, I learned so much from you. And like when I got to visit you at the Ubisoft User Research Lab, I got to understand how and why we were collecting the data and able to connect you with other researchers doing very similar work and how this data collection now really influences games to this very day.
Yeah.
So through all that, you have moved from studio to studio. We alluded to some degree, you kind of experienced total burnout. You said it catches up to you. How did it catch up to you? When did it catch up to you? How did you know you were on fire?
I think this is going to depend on each and every one. It depends on how you're wired. I knew a bit how I was wired, but I discovered a lot more since then, obviously. I'm not a person that I think is, I will say, naturally susceptible to this, which is stupid judgment because you can't compare. But as a person, I'm pretty aloof, mostly able to leave these things behind. I don't get shaken easily, and etc. But you're still accumulating debt. It's only that it doesn't affect you as much, which is cool, but maybe not at all because then you build more debt. And by the time when it blows up, blew up like really good. But I guess for me, it was a few different places where I experienced a lot of toxicity in daily work. And that was one of the most damaging things. And by that, I mean people being mean to other people and or to myself, but also to other people, being witness to a lot of just shitty people doing shitty things. That's the way I've got to sum it up. This can happen everywhere and anywhere. But the thing is this, when the stakes get higher, those things create more damage. You can't brush it off and go like, meh.
Because you are now creative director. That's the role you
Yes.
were in after you left Ubisoft and you went from studio. You had achieved it, what I thought was like the pinnacle of success, creative director. That
Yeah.
seems big to me.
Yeah. And it's what I wanted to do. It's what I dreamt about to some extent. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate, worked hard, obviously, but very fortunate as well. That's just the way life is. But yes, so the stakes get higher. And so when you care a lot, it's great, but then you get more damaged. The thing that broke me, which I think is a threat to anyone who's been, let's say, in games for a little while, is I was in a situation where the best way for me to describe it is I was like those UN blue helmets guys. I don't know how you call them in English. It would say casque bleu in French, which is the guys with the blue helmets,
Yeah,
which are they're deployed to
the peacekeepers. You're
peacekeepers. Yeah, UN peacekeepers. Thank you. They're deployed to some of the most horrible or difficult situation, and most of the time they're not really allowed to do anything. Right? They can't really shoot. They can't really defend. They can't really take in. They have a lot of these rules, and I think some of them we've heard about. They would come back and be like PTSD from the inability to act on. They were there. They were able. They were capable, and they couldn't do it. So, of course, to an infinitely lesser extent, I was in a situation where I felt like I've not done all this to be in a situation where I watch these people just burn money and burn other people and not care. And eventually it was spring break. So I went on a vacation, which was amazing. Got some sun with the kids. Great. I came back and I never did. Basically, on the Monday morning, I couldn't get out of bed. I just physically couldn't get up. And my wife looked at me and she was like, this is not working. And I had broken. I didn't notice, but I couldn't come back from that distance and it was just too much. And then it took me like, I don't know, 8 months to get back in a somewhat correct shape to work. And it was brutal.
So, what did you do to get yourself back to work? I mean, I, as one of your friends, I've been looking for you. I had to seek you out. Did you tell many people what was going on? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, I was very forthwith because, well, I think it's important. But yeah, people around me would know. My colleagues would know. They did, and people I would talk to eventually. In my family, people will know I told them I'm on a leave. I wrote down this is too much. And I'll be honest, I seeked out help immediately. And I was like, I need to fix this, whatever it is. I don't care. I don't mind. I have no particular opinion or stigma about it. Whatever do I need to do? I got the therapy, took medicine, everything I could to get back on track. And I wanted to work. I wanted to get back in a place where I would be doing what I love. And I remember telling people, I just want to do my job. Just let me do my job, which is a crazy. It was like one of those mantras. I would be like, I just want to do my job, like in my feverish sleep. But yeah,
But you have a particular workout, and like this is something that kind of has kept your sanity for a long time. So why don't you talk about that for a moment?
yeah, it's kendo. Kendo is the Japanese martial art of fencing, and most people would know kendo because they would have seen people wearing armor, screaming very loud, and hitting other people with sticks. And that's what kendo is. I make it sound dumb and simple, but it's an amazing martial art. But it's a practical martial art, meaning that it's a combat system that you actively use against an opponent. So it is applied like boxing, I guess you could say, or fencing. And so this is yes, this has been amazing at 10 years. I'm sure it was a big part of a balance as well, just because it's great for the body, it's great for the mind. Interestingly, and that was probably the hardest part, is when I hit that burnout, when I hit that wall, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do anything basically for a while, nothing at all. And because I had also the role of the instructors on my dojo, then that was responsibilities. I stopped teaching as well. I couldn't teach. I couldn't do anything where something was expected of me, which is horrible because you feel like you people stop. I can't. I just can't. And I was lucky in the sense that I had that whole depressive episode was work related. And I say I'm lucky in the sense that my life was great, still is, and I could rely on that. And I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to get back to work. So at least it was a situation where I could try to map what is the road to that. And even with my employer at the time, and I was a behavior at that moment, great company, like with the biggest independent here in Montreal. And they were very supportive. And it was like, what's my roadmap to get back? What can I get back on that is like going to work and that is proper? And we did figure it out. And I got back. And then I had a great year after that. So I was really lucky and happy for that support. And I got to do my job and I got to work on that and solve it.
Coming back from that and then being able to go back to do your job, and now you even moved on from there and you have even more responsibilities. Do you want to talk a little bit about what drives your moves between studios, and how do you know the timing is right for those kind of moves?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I know. I'm motivated foremost by two things. So the mandate is very important. I don't care so much about, let's say, the specific game or the specific brand, because I was lucky to be part of UB and I touched like a lot of these amazing franchises that any dev would dream to work on, rightly so. But because of that, I guess very quickly I was like, yeah, that's actually not the most important thing. And the whole notion that, and I'd say this to designers all the time, like that you think you want to work on something you love as a gamer, but that's actually a trap and it's probably not the best idea when you start. So I keep on wishing to people, I wish you work on something you don't like. That would be the best move for you. But anyway, so I look less for the brand itself, but the mandate is very important. What is it you need? What can we build? This was a big part of what attracted me because I love behavior. Like in the best of terms, I was not looking to move, but this thing came up and I was like, yes, the mandate, the big why behind has to be really clear. And that's really important for me. And then obviously, again, you'll hear this a lot, but it's true. It's the people. In the end, at the end of the day, it's the people, because we all, with the years, I could name a bunch of people that I personally disliked working with or that I think are horrible human beings. Like we all have that list and that's fine. Or even people you don't know. And then you start interacting with and you recognize those traits that become more important. And it is a lot about what I said before. Respect, openness to failure, like the love of the process, I think is very important, especially when you're building something from the ground up. You must be interested about how you're going to do it, not just like throwing stuff and hoping it sticks. That's not a process. That's how you get bad experiences, I think. But so I get drawn to those things. And yeah, and this is why I moved like a few months ago because this new initiative came up and it was from the ground up. It was great people. The idea is completely crazy, but the mandate is fun. So I figured, okay, there's something to build there. Hopefully, I can provide some of my experience and ideas there. And we'll see.
So those are the kinds of challenges you're seeking out at this juncture. Those are the kinds of things you're looking to do.
Yes.
Is it something that would benefit our listeners? Are there things that maybe when you think about the people that are part of the global game jam that they should be looking at or thinking about as they're developing their own skill sets and
Yeah.
trying to someday be a creative director?
Yeah. Who knows? The so first thing is, how can I say this? The latter is a lie, and this has been an issue traditionally in games. I think it's gotten better in some studios, but you'll see what I mean. Traditionally, you start a position. Let's say you're a designer. And then eventually you design and you do games or whatever. Yep, you're doing good. And so you might end up being a lead game designer. And that's probably already the first mistake because traditionally that was the only way to evolve. It was the only way to evolve, saying, well, now you have experience, you know more, you can solve problems, and you've gone through some hardships. So now we're going to give you this lead position. But it's not the same job. And some people are never meant to be leads and probably they don't want to, but they feel like that's my only way to keep on progressing. And they may end up doing the same thing with creative direction or game direction, as an example. But again, it's a third job. It's not the same thing. And so my message today when I talk to designers or when I teach is these are three different jobs. So be aware of what each one entails and then discover which one you want to do. And you might change later, that's fine, but just be mindful of that. It is not a straight a ladder straight up because maybe I wish in 15 years you're like the most expert ninja unicorn super senior principal designer person and we might need that on a project and you tried lead and you're like I don't like that. Director is like a different game. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I'm just like a super uber experienced designer and that's what I do. And we absolutely need that. Those are not the same jobs. So you got to figure this out. What are you good at? Try different things, but think about what I think the progression is. What is it? If I could choose, what is it I would do? Like there's some days where I wish I would sitting down as a designer and writing designs because I still love it so much. But it's not my job anymore. And I actually, if I do that, it's probably an issue for my team. And then you got to look for the thing you love doing daily. And for designers, what I mean is fall in love with design and not with the game you're doing. And what I said before, if you're lucky, you work on a game for a German studio that is catered for the 8 to 12-year-old girls, and it's about running a ranch with horses. And you're the lead designer, you're the main designer on that game. If you're lucky, that's what you get because then you will have to love design because you probably don't care about running ranches and you're not a German 12-year-old girl. So how do you do a good job? You need to love the job itself. You need to go, okay, so what are the issues? How do we tackle this? Who's this little girl? What is she like? What's the console we're playing on? What's the historical like and go through like the billions of questions and tap in all the fields like psychology, neurosciences, fashion, architecture, like whatever it is, you need to fall in love with that process. And that's how you keep up doing it. And that's how you become good too, because then you can solve anything. And that's what people need. They need designers who can solve anything.
That's true. That is true. And we will have a lot of problems. Now, I have one more question
Yeah.
about community and you. You live in Montreal, which
Yeah.
is happens to be a gaming hub. But how do you interact with the community? What's the importance of community to you? How has that helped your growth as a maker and a developer?
The answer is not nearly as much as they should. I think that's my general observation with time. I personally, I've done it mostly through teaching because it's something I love doing. And I do have the hope that it's useful to some extent. But that's how I do it. That's my main vector. I've done it internally a lot over time, but also then externally. And that I think that has become very important and useful for me. And of course, you will hear teachers say this, but like the amount that you learn by teaching is completely insane. It's invaluable. Because there's a few things. Well, first, you end up having to master the things you talk about as much as you can, like you have to. And also because you're challenged by people, and a lot of them much smarter than you are. Some of them will become more amazing than you are, hopefully. And you have to answer to the call, right? You got to go up to the plate and play your part. So I love that pressure. For me is a very healthy pressure because it is made of goodwill and enthusiasm. I love having a student that's a bit of an ass, challenging me, trying to corner me to a question. And I think that's great. That's a great way to do it because it's in the spirit of working with ideas and looking for failure and then just trying to better the process. And so I've gained a lot over the years by doing that, I think.
And
And
I think it also helps, at least for me, keeps me engaged a little bit more. And
yes,
and really one of the reasons why I wanted to do this for the community was because I still wanted to be motivated about the industry. I still want to show people that someone like you who has been very resilient throughout a career and really share with them that it takes a lot of wherewithal, but it also takes a lot of drive, which I think you show so much of. But, I guess as we're starting to wrap up this interview, how would you like to end the interview? What message or thing would you like to emphasize, you know, and you
well,
want people to leave with?
so I will share what I genuinely think, and hopefully it doesn't sound like too pompous or grand because it's not meant to be. So, video games is the most powerful medium in the history of mankind. That's what it is. And for very simple reasons. It uses the most advanced immersion and technology. It's interactive. Games are about systems and people interacting with them. And so, therefore, it has a potential for the most powerful experiences available to mankind. And in that way, we should be very passionate and feel very fortunate to be involved in working games. But we should also think that we have a responsibility to keep on pushing it because we are working for the betterment of mankind, potentially, through games, aside from the products, aside from all the usual stuff, the money's everywhere, blah, 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 of course. But use that to create something more. And that's my deep feeling about this.
Well, and I think that comes full circle. Like you said, how you grew up, this whole idea of acting and performing in front of people, and in that whole idea of how you interact with people as being that key thing. And that brings us back into how you've evolved your career, as well as really, I think, help share concepts and ideas about how to design and design with the player in mind, as well as really, I think, been one of those people that has set the little fires and things in motion that have gotten us to open our eyes, gotten us to look at user research a little more carefully. Before we used to just collect it, a lot of it. And then, and the work that you've done and although you may not think you've helped the community a lot, I know that at every studio you've worked in, and we're not talking about small studios, you have helped thousands of people through teaching for Ubisoft and teaching future designers, teaching current designers, the people that have been able to influence you, who I think are another conversation altogether. But the truth is that there is this person, and you have been incredibly integral into how we make and play games now. And not everybody is going, oh, it was Alexi, but
No,
it was
no,
my friend Alexi. And I think we need to thank you. Thank you for your time here on the
of course.
podcast. This was so much more fun than talking to myself. It always is talking to you and to be able to share with our audience what I think is a very special person, someone who has made my life a lot more interesting and has given me so much more understanding of design. And I really thank you for always helping to level me up as a person And in our show notes, we'll put links to whatever you want us to. But if you guys get a chance, check out Alexis RLD Talks because they will really make you think again about your whole design process. Thank you so much, my friend.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for doing this, by the way, of course. Not just for me, obviously, not just for me. I love talking about this stuff. You know it. We could do it for hours, but thanks a lot. This
No,
is great.
thank you, Alexi, and love to your family. And thank you very much for joining us on the GTJ podcast.
Want to get involved with the GGJ podcast? We'd love to hear from you. Please send your ideas, suggestions, and questions to ggjpod@globalgamejam.org. And tell us who you think we should be talking to next, what stories or issues matter most to you about the future of games, and help us highlight the people and practices that make a sustainable creative life in games possible. Thank you for spending time with us on the GGJ podcast. If this conversation sparked something for you, please share it with someone who might find it useful. And don't forget to follow along so you never miss new stories from makers around the world. You can find more episodes, resources, and information about the Global Game Jam at globalgamejam.org. Catch us on Substack and on YouTube and anywhere else you find podcasts. This has been the GGJ Podcast. Thanks for listening and keep making games.